Dogman stories every day through Halloween.
Welcome to Scary Stories, the channel that tells you scary stories.
Welcome to Scary Stories. We've got two stories about encountering cryptids in the rain today. Let's get started with a Dogman story. The Dogman on the Rainy Day, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. Dear Scary Stories, I have a real Brad and Janet kind of story that my mother told me. She claimed it really happened to her and my dad back when she was expecting me. So that would put it around Halloween time in 1963, as I was born early in 1964. According to the story, they were driving along in New Jersey somewhere when the skies opened up and rain flooded down. Neither of them had ever seen such a downpour, and it soon became impossible to drive. Both the visibility and the slipperiness of the road were major problems, so my dad pulled off the road, and the two of them sat for a while, waiting for the rain to pass. They waited a long time, and when it lightened up just a little bit, Dad tried to start the engine and resume their trip. But now the engine wouldn't start, and they were really stuck in that spot. Mom noticed a large house with lights on past some bushes and a field to their right, and talked my father into running down the lawn in the rain and seeing if they could call a tow truck from the house. When they reached the front door, they realized it was quite large, a mansion really. They also saw no lights on anymore. Knocking on the front door brought no response at all. After a while, Dad noticed the door was unlocked, so he opened it a bit, leaned in, and called out, asking if anyone was home. Not hearing a reply, he and Mom went inside and found it warm. They took off some of their wet things and hung them over the radiators heating the place. Mom said the house looked lived in, and at the same time, it didn't. Everything there was very old. She noticed no radio in the living room, let alone a TV. There were no telephones as far as she could tell. The electricity was on, and they made themselves comfortable while waiting for the owner to come back. If they didn't have a phone, maybe they could give them a lift to a gas station or something. And so, that was how my parents' encounter with Dogman began. Innocently. There was no sign at all of what was still to come later on that night. Mom said they looked through the library in the house for something to read, but found everything to be old and very dry. I asked her what kind of books were there, but she said she couldn't really remember. They had words in their titles that she had never seen before, so she didn't make a note of any of them. Some seemed scientific. Others seemed scholarly in some other way she wasn't familiar with. So, with nothing to do, the two of them sat by the front windows, staring out at the rain, wondering when they would get out of there. Unlike summer rains, autumn rains can go on and on and on, and that's what this one did. Mom said the rain would sometimes lighten up enough that she could just make out the silhouette of their car parked just past the end of the front yard. But most of the time, it was coming down so hard that she couldn't see more than maybe halfway down that yard. There was a thick mist clinging low to the ground that didn't help any. After a while of staring into the unrelenting rain, my mother gasped at what she thought was the figure of a man heading toward the front door. My soon-to-be father laughed at her, since he saw nothing when he looked over. The endless water pouring down had begun to create its own illusions. Mom decided to stop looking outside and instead sit close to her husband to conserve their body heat. She'd let him stare out there and frighten himself for a while instead of her. Next time, she could be the one laughing at him. And that's exactly what happened, as Dad shouted and stood up suddenly, recoiling in horror from something he had seen outside the front window. His action caused Mom to almost tip over. She laughed out loud and looked to Dad, but he was not laughing. He was still staring, wide-eyed, at whatever had made him shout. Now, Mom looked to see what he saw, and what she saw made her scream as well. Because what she saw was the very wet head of a wolf. Its nose was pressed to the window. Its eyes were glaring directly into those of her husband. And that wasn't even the scary part of all this. The scary part was that this dog's head was up higher than my dad's head. This wolf thing directly outside that window was taller than my dad, who was 6 feet tall. So the two of them backed further into the house, going anywhere to get away from that giant wolf. They quickly discovered that the electricity was not working in every room, or at least the lights weren't. For some reason they went upstairs, I guess thinking it would be safer up there. As they rounded the turn up onto the second floor hallway, however, they saw, directly in front of them, the window at the end of the hall. It looked out onto the roof over the front porch of the house. Already, they could clearly see the wolf climbing up onto the landing outside the window. And they could also see that the window was wide open. Now, the idea of a wolf climbing up onto the roof of a front porch seemed a little strange to me, and when I asked Mom if she didn't think that was strange, she said she didn't have time to think about that. The window was open, and the wolf was heading toward it. According to Mom, Dad ran down that hallway, and the wolf essentially raced him to the window. Dad needed to close that window, or else that wolf would be inside. It was as simple as that. And, to put it very simply, Dad lost the race. The wolf had its head in the window, as Dad was still trying to stop and race back toward Mom. My mother told me that for her, everything slowed down into slow motion, and she knew that both of them were in greater danger than they had ever been in before. She ran downstairs before Dad even had time to make the suggestion to her. There was a door at the bottom of the staircase, and Dad slammed it behind him, locking it. The door didn't look like it could stand a barrage from a wolf that size, so Dad looked around and found a fireplace poker to use as a weapon. However, after a few seconds, they heard the wolf moving around upstairs and realized it had not chased them down the stairs. Mom says Dad became frantic, insisting that there had to be a telephone or a shortwave radio or some way to communicate with the outside world somewhere in this house. Mom said she watched as he tore the place apart, looking through closets, cupboards, any place he could see that a telephone or radio might be stashed. He found nothing, and they could still hear the wolf tramping about upstairs. Once again, they were locked in this very zen state of having to do nothing, but having to do it very intensely. Dad asked Mom if she could run to the car faster than the wolf could, and she reminded him that she was expecting me. So in other words, no, she couldn't outrun a 6-foot-tall wolf. The point became moot soon enough, as they heard the wolf disembarking from the same window he had entered through, and now he was walking across the roof to the porch. Watching as he lowered himself from the roof to the grass, both Mom and Dad were utterly flummoxed when the wolf neglected to drop to all fours. It landed on its hind legs, then it just stood there and stared in at them. Mom said she was certain it was a wolf, but the way it stood was more like how a man would stand than any other animal she'd ever seen in movies, magazines, or the zoo. It looked more natural on its hind legs than a chimp or a bear, and it proceeded to walk bipedally up onto the porch, lean down, and stare at them through the front window. Mom said it seemed just as surprised by them as they were by it. I asked her for details about what kind of dogman or werewolf this was, what it looked like exactly, but she said it just looked like an incredibly wet and drenched, wolf-headed, hairy man. I asked her what color it was, and she got annoyed, saying that at the time, all she knew is that it was a giant, wet wolf, and that it was at the front door. So I guess she wasn't really thinking in terms of studying the creature for cryptozoological purposes. She was probably more interested in praying that it would go away, which it didn't. Not that night, anyway. In the morning, Dad woke Mom and told her he got the car started and that they could leave. She had been sleeping on the couch, but didn't remember how she got there. According to Dad, the creature left sometime around dawn when the rain stopped and the sun came out. After waiting a while to be sure the animal was really no longer there, he walked out to the car and did some kind of razzmatazz to get it working again. Don't ask me. She told me the details, but I forget. So they never found out whose house it was. I told her I thought it was the Dogman's house. Maybe he was a werewolf, and maybe he stayed outside as a courtesy to them so as not to give them heart attacks from shock. Although actually he did go inside now that I think of it. But still, I think that was the owner and that they had wandered into the house of a werewolf. Or maybe a wizard and shapeshifter. After all, those books that Mom remembered had words in the titles that she never heard before. Maybe they were books of magic and witchcraft. Maybe one of those books is where the homeowner learned how to transform himself into a bipedal wolf. Both of my parents are gone now, and all I have are memories and stories. My favorites are the most personal ones, which I can't repeat to anyone. But my favorite of their stories to pass along is definitely the one about the Dogman on the rainy day. We've got one more Dogman story right after this.
OMG! Join Scary Stories creator Peter Bernard in... Does that say Boxburg? Where is that, yo? Oh wait, down here it says Peter's gonna be at the Northeast Comic Con with Billary West from Futurama and Akira Takarada from Godzilla. Why was it telling me to say he was in Boxburg? Why would someone want to go to Boxburg if they could go to the Northeast Comic Con instead, yo? LOL, whoever wrote this script sure is silly, yo. LOL. That's Thanksgiving weekend after you're done with your tofurkey. Don't miss it.
Dogman on the rainy highway, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. Dear Scary Stories, this is not a long story, but I hope you use it anyway. I was driving along Territorial Road in Elkhorn, Wisconsin, about a year ago this past July or August. I'm not going to say why I was driving there, as it's sort of a private issue, but there I was, and it was raining really hard. I pulled off along the side of the road to watch the lightning getting closer. I have a fear of lightning storms, and I'm just not able to drive in them. I'm convinced something terrible is going to happen each time one of them starts. I'm not sure where this fear came from, but the situation I'm about to describe did not lessen my fear. If anything, it reinforced my inner notion that there is something otherworldly and truly frightening about lightning storms. I think that we as humans have not come close to understanding what they really are. So, I was alongside the road there, and I was watching the storm, and I was praying it would pass over me, and that everything would be fine. And then, off in the distance, way, way, way to my left, I saw a big man running toward the road I was on. Like he was in a field, and he was running like an Olympian, heading for Territorial Road. At first, I was just curious about this. I mean, it's sort of a strange thing to see. Then, as the guy got a little closer, I could see that it really didn't look at all like a man. It looked like some kind of an animal with a tail running on its hind legs. So I was trying to think what could do that. And I was thinking maybe a large bird like an ostrich. This had a longer tail than an ostrich, but it was making time like one of those things can. I was wondering how whatever it was could even get solid footing in what looked like mud out there. At some point in my staring, the creature must have noticed or sensed that I was doing this, because he turned and looked right at me. Then he did something I was really hoping he would not do. He changed direction and headed toward me. So now I realize there is one thing I fear more than lightning storms, and that is whatever that thing was. I started the car engine and gunned it, skinning and hydroplaning a bit before heading back in the direction I had originally been heading. The main problem with this plan was that I was heading directly toward that fast-moving animal, and it was heading directly toward me. As it approached, I could now see it was a dog-headed humanoid. I could not really make out its fast-moving legs, which were mostly hidden by tall grass, but it was a furry man with a dog head and a long tail, and it was running like the Flash in my direction. Finally, the creature and I were about to meet head-on in the middle of the highway. I swerved to the right, and he made a lunge for my car, barely missing, and I think tumbling off the road. I think he was trying to grab my back door handle or my rear bumper, and in fact I wasn't sure he hadn't done exactly that for the longest time. I continued swerving back and forth on the highway, looking for anything in my rearview mirror, but I never saw the thing again. I assume it rolled into the bushes and ran away, but I could never be sure. I drove straight into that thunderstorm, which was incredibly loud when directly overhead. I was crying and screaming with each crash down from the sky, but mercifully, I was spared, and I made it to my destination safely. Yes, I still fear lightning and thunder to this day. I know I survived that time, but one can never truly conquer lightning. One is forever at its mercy. It's still my greatest fear. Or, I guess I should say it's my second greatest fear. Right after the Dogman on the rainy highway.
Do you have a scary story you want us to read on the show? Just call our voicemail hotline, 804-LIST-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. And now for something completely scary.
Bigfoot attacked my tiny house. Scary Stories by Peter Bernard, Volume 1. Now available on Amazon in paperback.
Come back for more scary stories.